Good morning. My name is Carol Graham. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a College Park professor at the University of Maryland. And I've been collaborating with Brookings Mountain West and UNLV students for about 8 years and have benefited a great deal and met wonderful students like Mary, who I'm working with now.
And I'm Mary Blankenship. I am an undergraduate at UNLV, double majoring in chemistry and economics and minoring in Brookings Public Policy.
So the Brookings Institution, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the oldest and biggest think tank in the United States. And we're unique among think tanks in that we really are like a university without students. We're nonpartisan and independent. We think beyond partisan boundaries, and we think well ahead of today's public debates. So we do fundamental research, we do method development, we also of course do a lot of work that's directly applied to public policy questions. We also do work that attempts to frame entire sets of policy debates and policy choices. So we're way out ahead of the usual daily debate, at least with much of our work. So, and then Brookings Mountain West, Mary can talk a bit about more.
Yeah, and that's essentially just a branch of the Brookings Institution where the scholars here also conduct independent research, but they do it on a smaller scale that focuses on the Mountain West. And one of the services that Brookings Mountain West provides is the public policy minor, which is a really cool opportunity that students have access to, where it's essentially a very interdisciplinary program that has classes from political science, from journalism, from economics. Yeah. And so their students, and those classes are also co-taught by scholars such as yourself that come in with their expertise, and it's a really unique opportunity. That's pretty cool.
So in terms of substance, I'm one of the few early economists to work on the economics of well-being or happiness, life satisfaction, daily experience. I was involved in this approach from the very beginning in the early 2000s, and at that point we were considered crazy outliers that were actually incorporating human feelings and experiences into economic analysis.
How dare you?
How dare us? But indeed, that approach has taken hold, and we're now very much in the mainstream of much economic analysis, not all of it, of course. There's still plenty of skeptics. We're also, beyond anything I ever expected, there are governments around the world that are now using these metrics as an important part of their statistics collection and their policy design and decision-making efforts. These include the government of the United Kingdom, the government of New Zealand, Canada. There are many others, and the OECD has also implemented guidelines for statistics offices around the world for how to use these metrics. I work on everything from what determines well-being, what are the determinants of well-being broadly defined around the world, but then also what does well-being cause. And so we find, for example, that people with higher levels of well-being, particularly optimism for the future, live longer, do better, and are healthier over the course of their lives, and they're also more productive. More, well, sadly, what I'm working on now is the deaths of despair in the United States and how they are these premature deaths among primarily less than college-educated whites in their middle-aged years due to opioids, suicide, and other related diseases, how these deaths are related to low levels of well-being. And we're building a tracking monitor so we can actually identify vulnerable people and places. And that is that's obviously not a happy story, but it is one that I think in the end we can help resolve. And then Mary and I together have been working on another particularly US-specific problem, and I will let you talk a bit more about that.
So essentially what we're doing is trying to figure out what are the social costs of mass shootings. And so this is, I think, a very morbid topic that is difficult to discuss and difficult to discern sort of what is it doing to the United States as a whole, but then also what is it doing to communities that are suffering these tragedies. And so We've been doing this, I think, for like 2 years now, and we started with the Gallup Daily data, which if you
Survey
wanna-
data, right. So
Yeah.
these are surveys of a nationally representative sample of the U.S. population every day, 1,000 people a day. So it's a very large data set, and it has daily data. So we can actually identify the day of the shootings and how people's life satisfaction, anger, worry, stress, all vary in the course of that period. And we found some trends, but the problem is with this data, even though it's large, we don't have that many observations in a particular place, for example, where a shooting occurs. So we have now switched to trying to use and eventually match Twitter data, where you have tons of observations at the moment, in people in the localities where these things occur, and then also beyond that. This is a really new method, and part of what we're doing just entails getting the method right. But ultimately, our objective is to provide a way to assess the social costs of mass shootings in a way that goes beyond the body count, which is a very morbid way of thinking about it. At least as we've found so far, the broader costs of these for people who survive shootings, who know people in them, whose town they're in, and even beyond, are large. And at first we thought that people were becoming numb to these shootings, and there's so many of them that they don't react anymore. But I would argue that, at least from what we find, we're finding that there's a build-up effect, and that now the effects are perhaps greater and more widespread than they were initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we can find these sort of trends by doing collecting tweets after a consecutive mass shooting. So this actually started from UNLV Libraries, where they did a Twitter collection of 14 million tweets after the 1 October shooting. And then they did a collection on the first anniversary. And so when I was out at Brookings this past summer, we had the El Paso shooting, and so within days of that shooting, we were able to figure out how to set our own Twitter collection. And so right now we have collections that amount to around 30 million tweets, and we recently had another shooting, so we'll have more tweets. And so basically, what we do is we collect the tweets themselves, but within the tweet there's all kinds of very interesting information, like the hashtag usage, the emoji usage, and that's what we're focusing on right now. And then we can format the data and then actually use it in a regression analysis as well.
And so we can assess, for example, what the public reaction is, say take the El Paso shooting, which we've advanced the most, in terms of in El Paso, the day after, the day of, the day after, a few days after, and see how public reactions change. For example, we usually find the day of an event, there's generally shock and not that much of a reaction, but things change over time. And one thing we found in the El Paso shooting is, because there was a political motivation to that shooting, we found that while the initial reaction was sadness, we see anger build up in the few days after. We're also able to tag people's location, so that gives us a sense of whether they're from El Paso, or at least in El Paso, identify with El Paso or outside. And that allows us to see the geographic variation and difference between people who are very near such a tragic event and people who just see it on the news. And equally important, we also have repeated observations for some people. So we can then look at what we call in economics the within-person analysis. So we can see how not just a sort of scatter plot of emotions change, but how individual people respond over time and how their emotions change in, say, the days following an event like this.
Yeah, we could also potentially do the same person between different shootings and then see if that specific individual, if they get sort of more angry or less angry with each consecutive shooting.
Right, and one of our hypotheses on that front is that people who have had a shooting in their proximity, say people in Vegas, will be more sympathetic and more reactive to a mass shooting elsewhere than people who've never experienced one. And I think we have some initial data that suggests that that is the case, but we will be able to test this more carefully. And then in terms of a future policy agenda in this area, obviously we have a lot of work to do to get this method right and to just answer the questions we're trying to answer. But over time, I'd like to see us develop a way in which we can have an established methodology for using Twitter data and matching it to existing survey data, which gives us a broader over time view and also gives us more information on the demographics of the people that we're looking at. But, and if we're able to do that, we will be able to use this method to assess all kinds of other social phenomenon. And I think probably both of us wouldn't mind moving away from mass shootings when this is done. But and I know Mary has other thoughts about future agendas as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of work left to do for this, especially because considering how complicated the topic is of mass shootings, and then how many different kinds of mass shootings that can occur. So there's definitely a lot of work in the future. But really all of this couldn't have been done without the partnership of Brookings Institution and Brookings Mountain West that sort of got us to be in contact with one another in the first place.
Exactly, and also we had the luck to have the support and resources from the library collection here. And our partnership has involved Mary coming out to Brookings every summer, and those have been very productive times because it allows us to work together for a longer period of time. And of course, I come out here at least once a year. And it's nice to see how this partnership has developed more generally, both in how people within Brookings have embraced it and how it's grown here at Brookings Mountain West.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I know from personal experiences, going out to Brookings and to DC were just some life-changing trips, and certainly just being in DC alone was wonderful, but then working alongside such wonderful scholars like Carol, for example, is really, it's a very beneficial trip, and it's one that will sort of help me and will build me for a lifetime, basically. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Mary is going places, so we know that. I can't wait to watch where that is. Well, anyway, thank you for listening.